I missed the very first payment of rent on my new apartment this month. Imagine my surprise when I got a notice to vacate on my front door. I quickly went to the property managers and got everything fixed. Apparently the auto pay system that I had set up glitched, or somehow I made a mistake, or it just didn't go through, or whatever. Anyway, they forgave the late fee and they moved on. However, I didn't move on for about 20 minutes or so. I kept asking myself, how could I have made that mistake? It was so silly and so simple, and I'm not typically prone to that kind of thing. I kept blaming myself for a mistake that anybody could have made. But I had to ask myself, what was I really blaming myself for? It was a typo, a glitch in the computer, and it was just such a simple mistake. I feel like in my mind's eye, I grew up in a culture of blame. And one way I avoided being blamed by others was to just simply blame myself. If I blame myself, then nobody would have a reason to blame me for anything. And I was pretty wrong about how that was going to work out. When I was 9 years old, I saw a couple boys running away from the window. We were on a second floor classroom, and I peeked my head out the window because I was just curious what was still going on. And there was a teacher down there, and she was just pointing up at me and accusing me of, I don't know what she was accusing me of. But I ended up in my very first detention for something I didn't even do. To this day, I have no idea. It did drive me a little bonkers, though. Then, many decades later, at my last full-time job, I noticed a flaw in their computer system and pointed it out and offered a solution. And I got back was, we're not going to implement that because we don't have the time or we don't want to or something like that. Now, mind you, they hired me to troubleshoot and find exactly these kind of problems and offer up solutions. And I suppose it's not much surprise, based on what the topic of this video is, that a few months later, the system crashed, and sure enough, the culprit was the exact problem that I had found. The irony in it all was I got blamed for the crash. I got blamed for a failure for them to make the correction, even though I had made the suggestion. And they told me they don't want that to happen again. And I'm like, well, what was I supposed to do? Am I supposed to force you to take action on things when I make the suggestions? And their answer was essentially, yes, that's exactly what they expect. I was baffled, of course, because in my mind, I am not the one necessarily who forces people around to do things that seem reasonable to me in the moment. Anyway, that's what happened. And it happened very recently in my life and still stands out as a pretty prominent issue for me. Here's the thing. Problems arise, mistakes happen, both people and things break. That doesn't mean that there's always a culprit, that there's always somebody to blame, or that there was some sort of malintent. I think in most cases, mistakes just simply happen out of ignorance or just a misperception or miscommunication. And there's really nothing to be blamed for. Keeping this in mind, I think it's important for us to really restrain ourselves on blaming each other quickly. Blaming people has an impact that you may not see immediately. If you blame a child rightly or wrongly for something, that can have an impact well into their adult lives. And if you blame an adult, you don't necessarily solve the problem, and you also build resentment. And that doesn't solve anything. I often think that people resort to blaming because there's this innate sense of social justice that needs to be accomplished. But the question I have really is, what kind of justice is there in making other people feel bad? So in another job in my career, much earlier in my career, I made a pretty costly mistake. It definitely cost the company a lot of money, and I thought for sure I was going to be fired. I went to my boss's office and I looked to beg for forgiveness and to let him know that I understood that if he had to let me go, I totally got it was my fault. I totally understood where he would be coming from if he were to lay me off. But all he said was, don't be sorry, Just don't do it again. And those words had a profound effect on my career and on my life. He really demonstrated for me in that moment that I don't have to feel sorry for myself, and also that I can make mistakes and not be blamed for it, right? Like, I didn't make that mistake out of some sort of maliciousness or stupidity or the like. I just simply wasn't paying attention. I didn't go to the depths and efforts that I should have. And the thing about that comment is, even though I was really super cautious about taking certain actions after all of that had happened, I also found myself emboldened in some ways because I knew that I would be allowed to take risks. I just had to be more careful about how I took those risks to make sure that I covered my bases and that I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. He gave me a second chance, and he didn't blame me for anything. He just told me not to do it again. And that really made a big difference in my career going forward. And so that comment went through my head again today after failing to pay the rent. I didn't really do anything particularly wrong. I mean, especially in comparison to what I had done in my career so many years ago. It was a minor thing that happened today in comparison to the thousands and thousands of dollars that I had lost the company. It was just a hiccup. I fixed it, made a backup plan, and now I'm moving on. Life is complex. We can't fix everything. We can't prevent all of the mistakes from happening, large or small. However, we can take the time to restrain ourselves from blaming other people, especially if that blame isn't really necessary in the grand scheme of things. And just as importantly, we can also take the time to not blame ourselves for simply being human. As humans, we learn, we adapt, and we make more mistakes because, well, life. Thank you.